going out deep into the bushes where nobody can see them in order to relieve themselves. This takes away valuable time that could be spent in classrooms, but rather they're trying to find a dignified place to relieve themselves. The second category is schools with plain pit toilets and unacceptable sanitation.
Firstly, in our toilets there are no windows, and inside it's very dark. It is scary, and the doors are not strong. When you enter, some are falling and others have already fallen. They no longer open properly. So when you are sitting inside the toilet, you find that some of the seats are broken and they can tear your school trousers. Second, you can't, when you ask to go to the toilet, if it is an emergency in class, come alone. Because as you can see, it's very bushy, such that you can find someone waiting for you, or there is a snake, and you get bitten by things. So when you feel safe and when you come to the toilet alone, I will not come to the toilets alone. They are very scary. So it's either I come with one of my friends, or we go when it's 3 of us, so that I can feel that I am safe. And so that I'm going to use the toilet, I can give them my jersey so that I don't have to go in with it and have to smell and have it smell somehow when I go out. These are the words of Sinacho.
Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of our learners tell us how they have to move in packs in order to relieve themselves. One person to hold the jersey while the other keeps guard and while the other relieves themselves. One can only imagine what it feels like to be able to do this. But you do this out of necessity because this is the only way that Moni learners can relieve themselves. The third category is schools with new toilets and old toilets that are not demolished. An example of this and the effect of this was the tragic death of Lumkam Ketwa in the Eastern Cape, where despite there being new toilets, there's old toilets that always are a safety hazard, particularly for young children. They play around them, they don't know that you shouldn't be playing there. And because the structures are unsafe and they're old, cannot stand when a young learner plays around them. And this is how we lose children. The fourth category is schools with inadequate toilets. They don't have sufficient toilets for the number of learners.
This is a quote from Putu, who says, "Break time starts and ends while others have not yet relieved themselves. Because these toilets are few and there are a lot of people, sometimes I ask to go to the toilet in the period before break so that I can get an opportunity to use the toilet."
So while many people don't see sufficient number of toilets as being a big problem, it is, ladies and gentlemen, because learners have to make the tough decision of leaving class early so that they can relieve themselves, because they know that at break time they would have to stand in line for many hours. The fifth category is schools with toilets that are not fit for purpose, they're not age appropriate or disability friendly.
We can't even have our own privacy. Like as a grade 7 learner, I'm 13 now, I am now big, and we can't have our privacy or take out our pads with our children there. And we don't have toilet papers. If we want to use the toilet for more than just urinating, we just take out the paper from our books or anywhere we can get a paper, then go to the toilet.
So for many learners, particularly those in primary, so what has happened in the province is that they've built toilets for grade R learners, and a lot of them are cubicles with no doors, and they have very tiny seats. So the problem is that when a learner is much older and has started menstruating and needs privacy in order to manage their periods, they aren't able to do so in privacy. So you either have to get one of your friends to stand there while you change your pad, or you just simply have to go home or use the bush. Other problem is that many of the schools don't have toilet paper or a place to dispose of their sanitary towels. What ends up happening is that even though government invests in expensive, toilets that aren't waterborne, if you put in sanitary towels or things like newspaper, leaves, rocks, whatever that is being used, it hampers the lifespan of the toilet and it doesn't last as long as it should. And so many learners have to contend with that even after sanitation facilities are built. The last category is schools with poorly maintained toilets.
Our school pit toilets are full and filthy. We cannot use them anymore for our own health and hygiene. Some are completely inaccessible. We are therefore forced to use the bushes when we want to relieve ourselves. We walk up to a half hour to get to the bush. The journey would actually be longer had we not cut open the school fence to create a shortcut for ourselves. And this is from Tabisa.
My hope is that while these are very short anecdotes from learners in the province, that having different people say it and hearing the experiences of many of these learners will make it more immediate and cause some more of an urgency in us dealing with this issue seriously. And so the report itself has many more stories of learners who set out their experience and the undignified state of sanitation facilities. We all have to relieve ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, and most of us do it in the comfort of our homes, where there's doors, where you can flush your toilet, where you can even sit there and read a magazine. But for many learners in poor provinces such as the Eastern Cape, such as Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal, this is not something that they have at their disposal. Thank you.
Come in. Place your seats. Okay. One of the next things we tried to do with this report was to counter an allegation that, well, we understand it's a problem, we understand that these toilets are unsafe, but the state can't afford it, there's nothing we can do. Because we don't believe that to be true, and we've done the analysis in the report which shows that that's not true. I haven't put all of it up here, it's quite detailed and technical. I refer you back to the report. Our budget analyst is at the back. If you have any further questions, Daniel, jump around. Okay. That's Daniel. He did a lot of all of this budget work. But just to highlight some of the points, essentially there's two prongs to the discussion. The one is to find money to sort out this crisis urgently. You make more effective use of the resources you have. And the second way is you increase the resource envelope, and we've given a whole lot of suggestions of ways in which we think that these two things can be done. For example, identifying best practice in delivery. So that there are a couple of models that have been used for delivering infrastructure in schools across the country, and the analysis compares them and shows that some have been more successful and some have been less successful. And so one of the things that can be done to make more effective use of resources is to identify those models that work and use them. Eliminating fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There's been huge fruitless and wasteful expenditure and unauthorized expenditure, which can be corrupt spending. And the report lays that out as well. And if those things are eliminated, there's immediately a pool of resources which can be used to fulfill these rights. And then increasing the resource envelope. I won't get into it because, again, it is quite technical, but there have been a couple of grants introduced to try and alleviate the backlog in school infrastructure. And while they've been to some extent, they have been very useful, what some of the provinces have done is they've started shifting away from spending their equitable share, which is the budget they receive all the time for their ordinary functions, to using only the conditional grants, which are specifically allocated to alleviate backlog. And so what happens is the grants are not used for what they should be, which is to catch up. But again, it's much more eloquently described in the report, so I would strongly recommend you go and you read that or chat to Daniel, who's very happy to discuss these things. And then the last, where we get to with all of this, is a set of recommendations that we hope will be taken up and will spur a bigger, longer, seriously taken conversation. One of the things we picked up consistently is, and Laura will talk to this a little bit later, the data that we're getting from various elements of the state is inconsistent. We never really know how many pit toilets there are, and it seems no one in the state does either. And if you don't know what the size of the problem is, how can you even start to set about fixing a problem? So we've recommended a rigorous audit and a database of information which is constantly updated, that is publicly available, and that has a mechanism that if there are mistakes in that data, there's an input mechanism from those who know, who have information. This is quite a particular recommendation. The CSR has done a condition assessment of schools in Limpopo. We know that they've done it, we know that it's ongoing, but we don't have access to the most recent version of that. We have access, in the report you'll see we've had access to an old version of that information because we subpoenaed it in a case. But because we gain access to that information through subpoena, we haven't been able to get hold of the more recently updated data. So even we don't have access to that. Only the state has access to that. Responsiveness of district and circuit officials. One of the things we keep coming across is that when schools complain about the status quo, they just get ignored. We've experienced it ourselves in Section 27, that very often, no, you get ignored, you get flat out ignored until you threaten litigation, and then you get responses. And so we've recommended that districts and circuit officials be held accountable to answer to complaints, and that there be a complaints mechanism in place that is responded to. Protection of whistleblowers. This is something that again keeps coming up in our work on this. Principals are scared. One of the principals we spoke to for this report, we had to anonymize the data. He'd been threatened with his life for speaking to an entity such as Section 27, and he didn't want his name revealed. So the data's there, but it's completely anonymized. If this is, and it's happened more than, this is not the only time we've experienced intimidation of people who are reporting injustices to us. So we've again recommended a complaints mechanism, and specifically the complaints mechanism is to incorporate protection for whistleblowers of systemic failure. And then the last, which is the kind of big thing we've been calling for all along, is a clear plan to sort out sanitation in schools. It must be measurable, it must be concrete, it must be time-bound, but it's something that we can see is being taken very seriously at a systemic level, which, although there have been a few attempts at doing this, we haven't actually seen so far in the province. So really, if fulfillment of the right to basic education in respect of this aspect is to be taken seriously, this plan has to be in place. And it must include interim solutions for children whose lives are in immediate risk every day. When there are open plain pit toilets, children's lives are at risk every day that they're going to school and using those plain pit toilets. And then there are a whole lot of budget recommendations, which again we won't go through, but they're quite specific, and they talk to some of the things that I mentioned in the previous slide. So we're not going to open the floor to questions now, because we'll save that for the end, but that's kind of the overview.
And then, sorry, just to say that the report itself, of course, is a bunch of words grouped together to try and paint a picture. But just to say that since the passing of Michael and since taking on the case, we've found a number of other children who've died in sanitation facilities. And then just to say that we remember Siam Tandam Tulu, who was age 6 and died in 2007 in Limpopo, in the Eastern Cape. Lista Mavongwa, who was 7 and died in 2013 in Limpopo. Michael Komabe, who was age 5, who died in 2014. And Uratile Dilwana, who was age 5 and now is disabled, who fell into a toilet in Northwest in 2016. And we need to work hard in order to ensure that no more children lose their lives to dangerous sanitation facilities. Thank you.
While you take all of that in, we're just going to show you a video just now in a minute. I do want us to think a little bit about, I'm sure you've heard this before, about how society should actually be judged upon how it treats its most vulnerable. We're not doing very well. And it is something that I think more and more I'm convinced we need to think about it directly to the individual, to our own homes, to our own relationships with people we come across. Because sometimes we assume that people know what their rights are. And it does help to talk more and learn and just assist people who may not understand that, for instance, this is a basic human right. It's an unqualified basic human right. And that basically means that there is no justification for it not to be withheld. It doesn't matter whether the government actually has the resources. It's a basic human right. And how many people do you think actually know that? So within communities, we've just heard now issues about corruption and all of that stuff. If all of us are connected somehow to these places, if people in these places know that this is a basic human right, there is power in numbers. If more of them understand to what extent they have the right to be protected and to be given a basic toilet, then perhaps somewhere along the way we'll start eating away at this level of corruption and maybe start moving the wheel a little bit. So it's just something that I think we need to think about. Let's just watch the video and then we'll talk some more.
And now it's grade 18, I'm in grade 10. School says it's different. First of all, asnani yap, and each of the first day is and you can family, I would you want to and overall, kuna with our Papa. We Japan is here and realize that that's what we do and we just don't walk. Retire, maybe, maybe I should go more and stuff. Then the guy comes to retire, but I don't teach how to do that. To tell you about what I would like to just tell heads into the drive, which I won't show how we got to it. How do you ever do more than I tell you when I put it on push? Do you know what I'm doing? But I don't know what possible. But I don't know what it. 100 我们在说的我们看另外来讲我觉得我们阿里山那海的 then 人不管说他们我真的看到我这个关键肯定是这个你查到我 yes 没了你穿的这个这样的要穿的穿那我那人不能穿那你听到这个要这样那看到关键的东西 maybe 那刚才的那家的看到这光的那还不能把你那个查了那个那个或者 di parte generale di la produzione di un po' già in classe da sicuro e adesso giornalmente sono anche un primo scene di fare di sabato con la sì non oggi hanno di test la qua amici la parola zona anche c'è qua amici allora c'è sempre una loro un suo hai un da in c'è lo sa ma capire e la fine qua in una ci deve essere un po' di di fare già di seguire la capo poi che ha cooperato le scuole con un po' cosa la scuola
Right, so we've had a group of people who are going to try and distill all the information that you'll see in the report and try and bring up some infographics and trying to distill all the data. And I think Sarah is here. Laura Grant, you're right. Laura, please come in.
Hi, I'm Laura Grant. Alison just has to we were asked to visualize the sanitation report that's section 27 created and put it into a context with the rest of the data. And the rest of the data about the Limpopo sanitation situation, and we came up with this, the school toilets Limpopo forgot. What it contains, are you scrolling down? What it contains is a little bit of background about the particular situations, but yeah, this is the data that Section 27 found. If you keep scrolling, we mapped it. We mapped all of the 86 schools. Each one of those dots, if you hover over them, will take